Caesarea, the beating heart of Caesarea is the port, the harbor. So you can see a very huge artificial harbor that Herod built here. Now, in ancient time, you know that people who went on sea, on ships, this was a very dangerous thing to do. Many people did not survive. If there are storms, your ship can go shipwrecked and everything. Even today, it's not a very safe profession to do. And this is why when a sailor reaches the sea and reaches the harbor, what is the first thing they would want to do?
Protect it.
To say thanks to who? To the gods. To thank the gods for arriving, for being safe. So immediately above the harbor, Herod wants to build a temple, a huge temple to the goddess Roma and to Augustus. Roma and Augustus. Because in Rome, the emperor Augustus was also worshipped or venerated as a god himself. So the goddess Roma and the god Augustus. Now, if Herod wants to build a huge temple, here he doesn't have a huge area. He has a small Kukal hill. So how can he build a huge temple on top of a small hill? Exactly. He builds arches around this small hill, builds a platform above it. The arches hold the platform, and on top of the platform he builds a huge temple, which is exactly what he did in Jerusalem. Here it's much smaller, but still the same technique, the same way of thinking. So you can see the platform and the temple on top, just above the temple, and there are stairs going from the harbor up to the temple, and people who came on the ship immediately can go up, see this huge temple, impressive one, say thanks to the gods Roma and Augustus.
He never comes here. Is he an architecture and a builder that he's having all these models inside of Jerusalem, and he sends his builders down here to build these things? Is he creating the ideas of the arches? What do you think?
We don't know if it was him personally or the people that he employed. But under his leadership, under his rule, this is the way they build things.
We really don't know when he has the idea of creating these magnificent arches and stuff.
He gets the credit, right? But we don't know if he was the architect or he was just the entrepreneur.
Okay.
So, by the way, the same thing you will see at other places. When you visit Hebron, the tomb of the patriarchs, same building method. You visit a few other places, he uses it in a few other sites. So we have a harbor, we have a temple. In addition, you can see the streets, parallel streets that run in parallel to the shore, north to south, and perpendicular streets that go east-west, like any Roman city, planned city. Also, there is bathhouses we'll see here. What else does a Roman city need?
Maybe the theater, calcium.
Places for entertainment.
For sports.
Exactly, for sports. So you see here the theater that we're going to see in a minute. There's a smaller theater that was found in archaeology, but nothing remains of it today. Today, above it, there is the factory of Evan Kesar that I showed you. There is the hippodrome for horse races, a lot of functions for entertainment. What else does a Roman city need?
Government offices.
Government offices. This is supposed to be the city of the king, even though he himself didn't come, but it's supposed to be ready for him. So you have a palace, a huge, amazing palace that Herod built for himself, and this palace will be used later by all the other governors. So you see that you have everything you need in a city. This city is surrounded by a wall. This is the Herodian wall of the city. Now, after the time of Herod, the city continues to exist. Under the Roman rule, the province of Judea is not governed by kings anymore, but by Roman officials who come here. They will settle in Caesarea because they are Romans. They come from Rome. They are Roman officials. They come here for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years to perform a job and go back home. So they want to live in a city that feels Roman. They don't want to live in Jerusalem that feels Jewish, which belongs to a different culture. They want to live in a city that looks Roman, that feels Roman, because they are Romans. So Caesarea becomes the capital of the province of Judea. And Caesarea will actually be the capital of this area, of this land, for about 600 years, until the Muslims will come and move the capital to a different place, and we'll study about this later. For about 600 years, Caesarea was the capital of Judea and later of province of Palestine, when the name will change in the 2nd century. But if the city continues to function as a capital, the city also continues to grow. And in the late Roman period, 2nd, 3rd century, the city develops even outside the city walls. Now they want to build even more functions, because the theater is already a little bit small, and the hippodrome for horse races is a little bit small. Now it's a huge city. At the top, it reaches between 50 to maybe 70,000 inhabitants. It's a huge city. So they build a new hippodrome outside. When we live after, in a very long time from now, when you're exhausted and cannot hear me anymore, and we'll be on the bus, I will show you where this hippodrome was. They built an amphitheater for gladiator fights and battles, also outside the city walls. Both of them don't exist today. You've seen only remnants, but they are there. They existed. In the Byzantine period, 4th, 5th, 6th century, they already built a new city wall, because the city expanded. So this is the Byzantine city wall of Caesarea. You can see that now it's a really huge city. After the Byzantine period, the city is now conquered by the Muslims. The Muslims now don't use it as a capital, but it becomes a small city. It's not the center of government, it's not the center of power, so it shrinks. It becomes much smaller. We'll see a few Muslim remnants, mainly this wall, but not a lot that remains from the early Muslim period here. But the next rulers of Caesarea are going to be the Crusaders. In the Crusader period, the city is much smaller, mainly around the harbor. And eventually, in the middle of the 13th century, the great Crusader King Louis IX, Saint Louis, is going to build these Crusader walls around the city. You can see now it's a much smaller city, only inside these walls. These are the walls that still exist, that still stand today, and we're going to see it and talk about it later. After the Crusader, who conquers the city? The Mamluk. Baibars, the same Baibars, the same year as Al-Suf, just a few months before, 1265. He comes, conquers Caesarea, and what does Baibars build here? Nothing. He destroys the city, doesn't leave anything here. And during the Mamluk and Ottoman period, nobody lives here. Except a tiny exception that I'm going to speak about just before lunch. But that's still a long time.
Aren't they thirsty?
Out there?
Aren't they thirsty? How do they get water here?
So we're going to speak about the whole water subject later. But there, in the Herodian period, the water supply for the city is mainly wells and cisterns. There are no aqueducts in the Herodian period. What happens after the Herodian period, we're going to speak later. One last thing I want to show you here in the model, because we're not going to go there and visit there, is this bit over here, which is in the north part of the city. If one day you go there, you'll see a sign that says the Synagogue of Caesarea. Because we know that there was a synagogue in Caesarea, and actually the synagogue that existed in Caesarea during the Second Temple period is very special, very famous. Because when Jewish writers speak about it, they call it Canista de Marduta, the synagogue of the rebellion. because in the year 66 AD, in the courtyard of this synagogue, a few pagan people came because there was some argument about who owns the area of the synagogue. So the pagans came in Saturday, on Shabbat, and slaughtered two pigeons, two birds, and gave a sacrifice to the pagan gods in the courtyard of the synagogue in Caesarea. And that is, of course, something that the Jews of Caesarea cannot just ignore. So they go and beat these pagans, fight with them. And then this small incident here in Caesarea begins to escalate because people in other cities hear about this fighting that went along in Caesarea and Jews beating pagans. So the pagans of Beit She'an go to the Jews and beat the Jews of Beit She'an. And the Jews of Jerusalem hear, the pagans of Beit She'an beat the Jews, so we in Jerusalem are going to beat the pagans here. So this fighting begins to escalate, and this was the trigger, not the reason, but the trigger for the major revolt, for the large revolt that eventually will end 4 years later in the year 70 AD with the destruction of the second temple and the end of the second temple period. So there were a lot of reasons for this rebellion. You will study more about it, but the trigger, the spark that began this rebellion was this incident in the synagogue in Caesarea. This is why in Jewish sources it is called the synagogue of the rebellion, Kanista de Morduta. But that's a very nice story that I told you. If you go there, what do we find there? What? 66 AD. 66 AD.
And
the rebellion will be finished.
Destroyed
in
of the second temple time.
AD.
Destruction of the second temple.
So if we go there, what do we find there? What is there? Why is there a sign there about the synagogue of Caesarea? Do we find there a synagogue from the second temple period? No. Do we find there a synagogue from the Roman period? No. Do we find there a synagogue from the Byzantine period? No. What we do find there are a few very, very strong evidence that this was a Jewish neighborhood in the Byzantine period, in the 5th and 6th centuries. This was a Jewish neighborhood, and we do find a few mosaic floors that mention donors to a building, and that happens usually in a public building. You don't put mosaics with donations in your private home. You know who gave the money for your private home. So if there is a public structure, public building in a Jewish neighborhood, we can assume that this was the synagogue. So because we assume that this is the place of the Byzantine period synagogue, you will see in your course that many times in many cultures, holy places remain holy places throughout the ages. And at the same place where we see a Byzantine period synagogue, we can assume very reasonably that before this was a second temple period synagogue. So even though we didn't find any remnants from the structure, the building of the second temple period synagogue, we can very reasonably assume that that was its location. So today, as I said, we will not go there. One day when you're a tour guide and you do the further qualification every year, you can come to a further guiding in Caesarea and you might go there. It's very nice, but not a lot to see. Questions about things we saw here?
About the port, about the entering the port. So the measures, and it was the length. It's very, very big port in that days.
It was a huge port.
And that was only for what? Exporting what and importing what?
For international commerce. We'll speak about it later when we are there. But basically, Herod wanted to get all the products that are brought from Egypt, the breadbasket of Europe at that time, to Europe. He wants them to pass here and sleep here for a few nights and pay taxes here and sleep here and then continue. But we'll speak more about the port later. So what we are going to do today.